Hi, my name is Jonathan Ramirez, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about America's capital punishment system, some of the good aspects and the bad aspects of it. Let me start by saying a couple months ago when I started doing research on the topic, I was completely opposed to it. I didn't believe under any circumstance we should be able to take a life. And then as I did more research and I learned more about it, my mind somewhat changed. I'm kind of in the middle now. After learning all the safeguards that we have in place to try and stop people from slipping through the cracks, I think it's not that bad of a system now. Okay, the only way to be convicted of capital punishment is to commit a murder. As early as the 1970s, you could be convicted to death if you kidnapped or raped someone, but in 1972, a legal case by the name of Furman versus Georgia completely changed that. So now the only way to be convicted of murder or capital punishment is murder. Okay, methods of capital punishment. Capital punishment is legal in 39 states. In 37 of those states, you can be put to death by lethal injection. In 10 of those states, you can be put to death by electrocution. In 5 of those states, you can be put to death by the gas chamber. And in 3 states, you can be put to death by firing squad and hanging. In 2006, there were 53 executions, and 52 of them were by lethal injection. 1 of them was by execution. In 2005, there were 55 executions, and all 55 were by lethal injection. Lethal injection is universally considered the most humane way to be put to death. It pretty much, takes all pain out of being killed, which is kind of the reason some people are opposed to it. They want to see the person suffer as much as the victim has to suffer. All right, some economical facts on capital punishment. The whole process is on average costing about $1.7 million, and the bulk of that comes from super due process, which are the rights that every person condemned to death gets. They get automatic appeals to the Supreme Court. They get 2 attorneys. One of them must have capital punishment, and they get 2 trials. One of them to prove guilt, and the other one to a sentencing trial to determine their sentence. And on top of all that, life in prison usually only costs about $740,000, but the entire super due process takes an average of 6 years and costs $1.6 million. Okay, and another problem I have with that is ethnicity. African Americans make up 11% of our population in the United States, but 46% of the death row inmates are African American. That number just kind of stands out to me as somewhat wrong. I mean, it's kind of hard to prove racial prejudice against the jury, but there has to be something that's causing those numbers to be flawed. I don't know if juries are more forgiving of a white person committing a murder compared to a black. There's the oops factor, which is pretty much condemning an innocent man to death. I did some research, and on 1 out of every 8 capital punishment cases, the victim was later proved innocent. So 12.5% of the people we're putting to death are figured to be innocent after they're dead, which, I don't know, if we want universal support for this system, we kind of have to find a way to get rid of innocent people dying at all costs. There's positives. Some people just don't deserve the right to live. Some of the crimes they commit are completely inhumane, and they need to be punished severely for it. One of the names that sticks out to me is Suzanne Mary Briscoe. She was a lady who lived in Texas, and she talked a 59-year-old mentally challenged male who lived in New Jersey to leave all of his friends and family in New Jersey and move to Texas with the promise that she would marry him. And when he got there, she tricked him into making her the sole beneficiary of his extremely large life insurance policy. And then her and her friends proceeded and tied him up, and for the next week just beat him with bats, belts, and steel-toed boots. And then when he would develop wounds, they would clean his wounds with metal brushes and bleach. I mean, that's just wrong. And that lady, she deserved to die for that, and she did. Throughout time, there have been a lot of cases that have challenged the death penalty. The first one that comes to mind is one that I mentioned earlier, and that's Furman versus Georgia. It was a man that was convicted of breaking into a house and robbing it. And when the owners woke up and came down the stairs, he tried to run. And from what he said, he tripped and he hit the ground, and the gun went off and shot one of them. So he was convicted of armed robbery and murder. He was convicted to death, of course, and he sued Georgia, saying that the death penalty was, uncommonly used. How he was accidentally shot someone, he's being put to death. There are people that have killed mass murderers who are not being put to death at all. and there were people that were committing rape that were being put to death. So the ruling was that it was arbitrary, excessive, and somewhat selective, and that for the death penalty to be enforced, there had to be more consistency in the law. So after that, you could only be put to death if you were a murderer. That case overturned over 40 statutes on capital punishment and released 692 people from death row. In 1976, there was the legal case Gregg versus Georgia. The defendant picked up two hitchhikers where he later robbed them and shot them and left their bodies on the side of the road. He sued the state, saying that jury guidance discretion was unconstitutional. It was ruled that it was constitutional because it provided guidance to the jury. But a couple things came out of that legal case, like bifurcated trials, which is pretty much the two trials, one of guilt and one of sentencing. Another one is proportional review, where the Supreme Court's required to review your case to see if it kind of fits in with other cases with the same kind of evidence. And another one is automatic appeals to the Supreme Court. Another case was Roper versus Simmons. A 17-year-old was convicted of planning to kill his teacher, where her and a couple of his friends broke in, tied her up, and then threw her off a bridge. He later went to school bragging about it, and that's when he got caught. Well, the fact that he was 17 was the big issue around the case. The final ruling was a 17-year-old could not be put to death. He could be sentenced to life without parole, but could not be killed. We've even had some really recent cases in Kansas about capital punishment. In 2006, we had the case of Kansas versus Marsh, where the mitigating factors did not rule the aggravating factors. And if you don't know what that is, aggravating factors are pretty much like, was the crime heinous? Was the crime, it's pretty much like what was he feeling when he committed the crime? And mitigating factors are reasons that he committed the crime, like he didn't know any better. Like he doesn't have a strong history of capital punishment, or he doesn't have a strong history of criminal offenses. And the aggravating and the mitigating factors were tied at 3-3, and the jury still employed the death sentence on him. And it was ruled that if the aggravating factors don't outweigh the mitigating factors, the death penalty cannot be the tiebreaker. So that case was completely overturned. He was let off death row. All right. Well, my conclusion to this speech is I'm not strongly opposed to the death penalty, but I think it needs to be used in different circumstances. Like if you look at some of the biggest murders of all time, Jeffrey Dahmer, the BTK killer, and Charles Manson, none of them were put to death. They were all given life in prison. And when we have innocent people being put to death, I think we can at least put the 6 serial killers to death. Well, I learned all this information in this speech from this book called Death Quest 2, which I had to buy for a legal class I had a while ago. But anyway, thank you.